And then here, I'll tell you real-time alerts. I'm going to go through this. Assessing a supplier's level of risk, we do frequently. But it doesn't change that much month to month, quarter to quarter. What's changing all the time is weather, governments, those are the things, transportation issues. That's changing as we speak here, and that can highly impact. That's probably the biggest variable here. So having a comprehensive real-time alert system so that you know this ahead of almost anyone else. And I'm going to show you what happened with Fukushima back on March 11, 2011 in a little while. The point is that you need to know the information at time zero. And time zero could be 2 hours ahead of your competitor, it could be 2 weeks. Because the more time you have, what? The more options you have, right? If you're working at this tail all the way down here where everybody else is working, you're scrambling for parts or attention of that supplier. But if you know that at time zero, boy, you have a runway there that you can really get ahead and you could mitigate that risk. So having a real-time alert system, I'll show you what that might entail, is critical here. And having experienced people, we found that we had a cross group of people that, whether from engineering, procurement, the CIO office and so forth, that really helped enrich how we had this senior risk group. Now this is the onboarding. So I'm just going to show you, these are the elements of the onboarding process and things that we're looking for one time. The things I have in bolded italics are things that we would look at after the initial time. We'd look at some other periods. We might look at them annually or semi-annually and so forth. So what would they be? Well, certainly code of conduct, right? So you might remember there was a company, I won't mention the company's name, but a manufacturer that almost everybody uses in Shenzhen, China. And in 2011, the people were jumping off the building. Do you remember that? Okay, so now their view was that their suicide rate was less than the national average. But it made headlines in the Wall Street Journal. So if you're doing business with this company, the question is, why are you doing business with them? Well, it turns out they're one of the best and they're one of the biggest. But nevertheless, the NGOs are looking at this, and we are judged by what? Our supply chain, right? You can't just say, well, they're a vendor. I don't, they're over there. I just pay them. The world, your clients, the financial community, and NGOs judge a company by the company they keep, right, in terms of their supplier. So this is not something that's separate or foreign to us here. The financials, ever since 2008 especially, so many second-tier and third-tier suppliers in the supply chain that were smaller suppliers were really, their cash flow was disrupted. So there was an article I'll just share with you in the Wall Street Journal about, you might know, let's see, it's Lowe's or Home Depot in the United States, maybe it's here too, but they have a snowblower, and the snowblowers are in short supply. Why? Because the guy who makes the gasket or the carburetor, is a smaller company, and their funds dried up, and that they would only produce on COD, cash on delivery, or pay in advance, at that time period. So again, if you think your first-tier supplier looks good, what about your supplier network? How are they doing? So you need to be able to look underneath, that first-tier supplier, or you'll be surprised, just like I think it was Lowe's was on that. And then supply chain risk, that needs to be reviewed periodically, and business continuity planning. So what's your next best action? What are you going to do when that hurricane hits Manila and you have a call center there? Just wait for it to go and wait for the waters to subside? What's your action? That action has to be defined ahead of time, and then there's a trigger of when are you going to pull that contingency plan. So there's a degree of documentation, coordination, probably testing, right? You don't want to test this like when it's the real time. You want to make sure that you're not firing a blank, that you got a good shot at this. So we'll talk about that too. So what do we have here? This is our summary of what we're looking at is we're looking at a risk tool, a process that does several things. It assesses the risk, it looks at the level of risk, it rates the risk. It's all based upon an algorithm and maybe some judgment, and then a mitigation plan in place. So the mitigation plan has to be solid. So the buyer, the sourcing person, has to define that mitigation plan, have a level of sign-off, so that if we went to that plan and said, okay, you're up, that's plan B, let it play out. You'll see here too, we have a social listening. I'm just going to comment on that. It's legal. It's not this NSA thing, in the United States that what was his name, Snowden was giving away. So we're listening out there. We actually have a situation with our CIO office. We're listening to every bit of Twitter and chatter and the UK Guardian out there, because you know what? We want to know before anybody else knows. So we actually have a group of fetch words in this web crawler. So we're looking for child labor, forced labor, we're looking for bankruptcies. We have a whole list of, I'm listening for suppliers. I have a whole list of supplier names. I have a whole list of countries there. And we run this every day. So it's like pulling these things so that we can see. Now, I'll tell you, over time, we found things that, we're glad we found them first, right? Because once you know, with social media, what happens? It's not 2 weeks in the newspaper, right? It's like that. It's immediate. So if you're not finding it out ahead of the publication, all you're doing is backpedaling. And it's almost, whether it's true or not, if it's in the social media, it's impossible to, you know, it's not like you have a day in court. You say, well, that wasn't true, and here are the facts. You're done, right? So you need to make sure to keep it, you're not doing anything that would be in the social media, but if it is there, you need to find that out first and maybe have a statement about this is true or not true, or put something around that. So we're looking for this. Occasionally, I'll tell you what we found. It's not illegal, but it's not that good. One of our major suppliers was using prison labor. Now that's not illegal, but how does that look in the paper? You know, most people won't read below the headlines, right? IBM uses prison labor. I mean, what do you think that would do to our stock? It's not true, but don't quote me on that. It's just not good for the stock, right? So the stock price can plunge. I'll just tell you a story. I do many of these presentations with universities, and I was doing it in the afternoon. And the students, I guess they had their mobile phones, and they wanted to know, should they boycott a certain large company that was clear-cutting forests in Indonesia for palm oil? Well, I hadn't seen that in the Wall Street Journal that morning, but they wanted to know, should they organize a protest? That's how quick, especially, say, with millenniums, right, who are very conscious about this, but social media sweeps in, and you need to know that ahead of time. So our social listening program has been very, very good picking up information. I'm going to say, it can't pick it up ahead of time, right? If it wasn't written, we wouldn't know about it. But once it's out there, I need to know that right away. And I'll tell you one of the things here, as far as terminology, we're looking for strikes. We're looking for all kinds of strikes around the world. So we had to change the way we were looking at that, because we got Manchester United, we got like 5,000 hits one day about their striker or something. And so, you know, making sure that the words are such words that are maybe more universal and not misleading, because not misleading is very important, right? So because you get so much information, you really need to pare it down so that it's manageable. So that's one of the things there. Okay, now, let me see, just to show you a profile of what we're doing here, we look at 5 axes. So we're looking at the supplier as an entity, we're looking at the supplier site, that we're looking at the hubs that the products go through, we're looking at the country and the commodity, commodity. And then within that, we look at much, much more detail, and we have questions that we aim at each one of these. I'm going to show you the indices there, and then we do an evaluation. So we look at all these things. We had thought about, when we designed this, not what do we have, what kind of information do we have, because we'd be limited. We said, if we had a perfect world, what information would we like to have? So that's what led us to this conclusion. And then we went on the quest of going to get it, which was a little bit more challenging. So what do we want to know about our business that could impact it? And if we knew the answers, we could take a preemptive action there. What you see here, actually, we have a market intelligence team internal to IBM. They research a lot for us every day. We also have, we've purchased subscriptions from companies that do this professionally. So we will have a contract with them, and we'll say, we want to know, out of these 53 countries, we want to know everything that's going on that could affect the supply chain. So they might say, well, what do you want to know? We'll say, I don't know, I can tell you what I would have wanted to know, and we do some learning on that. And then we want to know about the politics, the unemployment, anything in this world is so fragile. It's that one thing that could just be that tipping point that turned things over. So we're getting smarter over time of what to look for.